Diana, would you
All
like to
right,
introduce yourself?
absolutely. Hi, everyone. Diana Wallace in here. I am a senior UX designer, part of the design system team at Indeed. I had 10 years of experience in this field, 5 years of experience in design systems, and the last year I have been obsessed with AI and decoding design systems to be machine readable. Fadi, thank you for having me.
Love it. And I'm a fan of your LinkedIn post as well. You are sharing a lot of interesting ideas there. How to make cursor and like do use all the AI web coding tools as well. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you.
Ivan, would you like to go next?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks so much, for having me. My name is Ivan. I'm a design eng at Persona. We help companies build identity verification software, and I recently joined as part of our design technology team. But I've been previously working on design systems for the past 4 or so years, doing a lot in kind of AI enablement and helping designers, engineers, and non-technical folks get features into our code base. So yeah, super excited to be here.
Love it, love it. And thank you for sharing. I just added your LinkedIn profile. Let me know if you would like to add other links as well here so people could connect with you. And my name is Farid. I'm going to host the session today. The goal for the session is to think about how to enable designers and product managers to use Cursor. As I shared in the beginning, the core metric is the iteration speed, go to market. So how can we speed up the idea to the actual thing that end user sees, right? So we are going to talk about the way how designers and product managers can actually make changes in the code, making this loop much more faster. So Ivan, would you like to kick things off and give your perspective on how to make designers and product managers be able to join the code within the cursor? Do you have some interesting practices? Maybe like what kind of like main challenges you see that people are having when they just start doing this thing?
Yeah, for sure. Oh, I was gonna say also I was having some trouble with edit access on the polls, so not sure. But yeah, I think I can give a little bit of overview and timeline onto our company's adoption for cursor and AI tooling. So I think a couple months ago or earlier in the year, we had a big company-wide push towards AI tooling and AI adoption, mostly like seen on the engineering side. And so this resulted in a lot of kind of like agents documentation. If people aren't familiar with agents MD as like this kind of overall file source, I'm going to grab the link for this right here. Okay, yeah. So agents MD is kind of this sort of interoperated way of being able to interact with various LM agents and software that people can use. And so our company decided to go down this pathway, write a lot of these documents, which are essentially high-level READMEs for how Gemini, Claude, Cursor, which uses kind of all of the various large language models, to be able to have a sort of like cohesive way to write all of these. And so once we had a lot of this infrastructure set up on the engineering side, especially in our main repository, we work out of a mono repo that kind of supports all of our front end, back end support. We have a Rails stack with a React front end. This actually was able to get more of the folks who are on the design and PM side to get on top of it. So we had another coworker, Joseph, on our design system, what we call our platform experience team, post our kind of like onboarding that we created this documentation around how to get started with Cursor, how to get started with GitHub, all these kinds of things that designers may like have some access to or have some familiarity with, and kind of create this like shared language of how to think around creating and branching. And so we had this kind of like 1 hour office hour block of getting everyone on Cursor. We ran into a lot of access and permissions issues, which is probably, I feel like if you work at a larger enterprise, you kind of have that experience of like, oh, like you're running into permissions issues. It's like, you're probably not provisioning, like engineering resources and support to designers. So we had like a little snafu there. And then once from there, everyone was able to get on Cursor. We kind of were just like, okay, like we on the design technology team had created a backlog of issues that, were sort of like design paper cuts of, hey, like we hear things where it's like the buttons are misaligned, or like we have some like padding issues, or these kinds of things where I think like as a designer, when you're going through the product and you kind of like see all these small things, you're like, oh, like this bothers me a little bit. But it kind of it's one of those things that like feels hard to, go to engineering and be like, hey, like I know you're working on this really big feature, but like, can you fix the button alignment? It's the kind of thing that you wish you could go in. And so we were just like, hey, like go take these tasks, like see what happens. And most of the designers were able to get through some of this. We also have Codex set up as another AI tool that allows us to support. And so all of this, we're able to be like, hey, kind of like play around with some things, see what you like, figure out exactly what you want to do. And then from there, I think like once we were starting to run into more issues, we as a team set up AI office hours. So I think the importance is actually that like you will never is like very, very hard, I think, to get fully automated custom support. Like you will need some help on the engineering side. And so we hosted office hours for half an hour every week that was like, hey, are you running into issues? Can we help you debug things? And I think most people came in for like setup questions or like GitHub PR questions or like Git branching questions, but being able to provide enough infrastructure where if people feel stuck, they don't really like, I think if people feel stuck, they feel like they don't want to adopt the product, but having that kind of support to say like, hey, like here's some really like safe spaces to be able to like, I don't really know what's going on. Like, and then we can help you with that.
Love it. This is great, and thank you very much. Like you shared a lot of things here, and I feel like the some of the highlights here is that the timeline is companies started to like pushing the AI, right? And the first thing that the team started focusing on is to start creating those agents.md files, making sure that people can like replicate some of the things if they are interested in refactoring or maybe building new features or maybe doing some testing. For every, I guess, workflow step, you have agents.md. I've tried agents.md, but I'm still a fan of Cursor rules, and I'll tell why, and will be great to discuss that as well. Then it's a great thing, enablement activity, to have onboarding resources for all the new hires in the ways how you are using as the company, the Cursor and other AI agents, and have the shared language. And I really like that as a part of the enablement, you also have this AI office hours where people can just join and ask any questions, and that's the place where you can also gather some feedback around the ways how people work. So I feel like this is like very, and thank you very much, Ivan, this is like very actionable steps that people can also follow. And yeah, and I totally agree, one of the core use cases where we can see the value is that like for these little details, it's not about adding new features that will like break the code or maybe might look very very hard to implement, but just small fixes like button alignments or maybe improving some typography in other places. Designers can just make changes in the code. And speaking about the agents.md, what I like about Cursor rules, and please let me know, I'm more on the Cursor rule side, is because when you are defining that, you can actually say when exactly you would like to apply. So there is a way to set up the globs. So it will tell what kind of file format. So for example, if I'm creating rules for the storybook creation, I can define that every time when their AI collaborates with this, interacts with this specific file format, that story is .tsx, for example. Please apply those rules specifically. Is there a way within the agents.md to define like which, like if AI like works with one specific file, this is the agents.md to use?
Yeah, for sure. And also Diana would love to hear your opinions on this as well. In our company case, I can drop the documentation here, which is the sort of like Cursor rules documentation. And they actually have in the docs support for agents MD. And so they're kind of, I feel like, two sides of they're sort of like they both get the same job done but in different ways. I think like specifically in the Cursor documentation, they say that agents MD is for more straightforward use cases. I think people within the company have definitely dived more in depth to Cursor rules. I think it allows you to provide very specific use cases. But for us, one of the ways that you can do this is that you can also subnest agents MDs into different folder structures. So kind of like to give a top level overview of how our project is structured, we have like the front end, back end, and then within the front end, we have like 3 folders of different components. And one of the things we say is that like every component folder structure has its own agents MD files. So for our design system specifically, it'll say like, hey, like here are the things that you should follow. Here are the things you should write within Storybook. And so the way that the agent will work is that it will always try to read the closest agent MD file in your subdirectory. And so that way it gives you kind of the same ability of the kind of like glob nesting to say like, hey, if it's a story TSX file, like only apply these rules. You can apply like specific rules based off of co-location. So I feel like they're just like different ways to tackle kind of the same problem.
Love it. Diana, we spoke a lot. So what are your reactions? Like, what are your thoughts on like Cursor rules on and agents.md files?
Yeah. So when I first started using Cursor, for me, it was like it was like unlocking unlimited opportunities, opening a new door. Because I am a designer, I'm not used to developing environment. And I actually have a lot of learnings that I share in an article that I am going to add to the middleware in a second. Regarding the cursor rules, I have been using cursor rules for a little bit. I have placed my roles there. I have created personas in cursor rules. But I want on this one around the agents MD because recently I switched to anti-gravity and I am opening my repositories in anti-gravity, and I want to make sure that my repository can be open on any IDE. And I actually asked anti-gravity, what is the equal for cursor rules of cursor rules for anti-gravity? And it told me anti-gravity rules, like that simple. But beyond that, I think that finding a common language that AIs can easily access and understand is the best practice. So I think going with the generic agents MD is more it's like future proofing.
Love it, love it. This is great. And then I really like your point is that agents.md, this is like unified format. Even if you will switch the tool from cursor to something else, right, it still works. So this is like a really good insight. So let's talk about the way how we can set up structure the repository in a way that will be easier for designers and product managers to use, right? I can share a couple thoughts here. So first thing, maybe for designers and product managers, some of those terms are new. So that's why it will be great to cover that. Within every repository, we have README files. This is like markdown files where if you have any questions about the way how things are working, there's a high chance that engineers have some markdown documents where they are documenting things. And on the root folder, usually if you would like to start, if you're just like joining, got the access to the repository, start looking for this README file within the root file where you will able to find some commands. And maybe now let's talk about that a little bit. How to make README file in a way that designers and product managers will able to understand how to use. Here's the one example where it gives some instructions for designers and product managers and the whole engineering team, where if they would like to get started with our repository, they will need to first install all the dependencies and then just have this command, npm run dev. And then they will able to open like localhost, like where it will be it will be running locally so that they could start testing in their browser and use Cursor browser as well for that purposes, and just have everything ready for them. So that the goal here is how to make this onboarding time for designers and product managers who just got access to the repository like as fast as possible. I've shared a couple commands here. They are very like general, and this is like applies in 80% of the cases. Ivan, do you have any thoughts on how to create a README file for designers and product managers? Maybe some interesting thoughts around what exactly they are looking for on those README files, and if they know this concept and if they are actually reading them?
Yeah, no, I feel like people generally know concept of README files, and this has been expanded. Like, I definitely see this in like our Google Drive or like Notion, where they'll be like, "Here's the README doc. Like, read that first." I actually think one of the best things you can do is that you can always ask the agent to do things for you. So actually, when we did our onboarding tutorial, one of the things that we asked at the end was like, hey, ask the agent to explain the code base. And I think actually Claude from Anthropic, like when you first set it up, like that's one of the first examples they give you. And so even if you don't have a super well-written README documentation, you can actually ask whatever LLM you're using to sort of summarize and give you high-level documentation around what the code base. I know engineers who do this as well. Like if like engineers are generally going into a code base super unfamiliar, and they'll ask Claude to do that for them. And so it's kind of like it's almost like the same equivalency here. And I think that especially in regards to some of the thoughts around documentation and specific commands, like I think actually it's not really exclusive to sort of like designers and PMs or like other folks. Like engineers need this as well. So all of our README documentation is like geared towards that. You have all of the onboarding set up. And so that's why I kind of think like that sort of like handheld onboarding is really important in the first step of getting everyone to the point where you can run it. I will say one specific thing that we did add is because our company for our web app uses like Dockerized containers to be able to support all of the database and hosting, that we were running into a lot of issues where we would ask Cursor to kind of like run our local environment, and they would be like, hey, we see that you have Docker not installed. Like, do you want us to install Docker? But we actually also have a local version to support that specifically through our Vite builds. And so I just had to go in and add through our top level README and say like, hey, like if you ever see a command or if a designer is asking you like, can I run my local environment? They're probably asking you for the specific thing. And I guess that kind of fits similar to like the Cursor rules agents MD idea. But I feel like the sort of like top level file is just like providing all those various edge cases to support. But yeah, all of the documentation, like in theory, actually, all the documentation should hopefully already be written for you, and you can just ask the agent to summarize it and get on from there. Because I think getting too in the weeds, like if you're not super familiar with programming, like getting too in the weeds feels really really overwhelming. But once you have it set up, it's like you know which buttons are wrong, and so you can like take screenshots and support all those things. And so I think getting over that hurdle is really important.
Love it, love it. You raised a really good point about the Docker, right? This is like sometimes requires additional software to run on the side, so that, yeah, maybe explaining as you mentioned as a part of onboarding materials and README files, and also adjusting the cursor rules, sorry, the agents.md file, and explaining different cases. I guess the core point here is to think about this journey of joining the repository and be able to run things locally, so that people will able to use browser capabilities to make changes in the code base. And yes, as you mentioned, Docker issues, there's a like that's a main one, right? There's also another one is with environment secrets, how to set them properly so that people who are joining, they will not like have access to the production one. But at least to the staging environment, right? So they could actually run and see how the app runs in the local environment, and they can make sure that if they are making any changes, they will not break anything. Diana, I'm curious from like your design background, right? Like what kind of things you are looking for when you are joining like just like a repository, like when you just got access to the GitHub, what kind of things you are looking for? Like, yeah.
Yeah, I rely a lot on the README files. And it's super helpful to see a taxonomy of the files, the taxonomy of that specific folder. And in my case, I have coded a few parsing orchestration systems where each of the folders has a specific function. So having a README for each of those folders helps me to have clarity on what are all the different parts of the repository. And it's exactly what I am looking for in our repositories, because README usually, well, I don't know, for developers, it's probably pretty well known that it's in the root of the project. The way that I use it, and might not be a best practice, is having a README per folder, because it's the way that I understand what that folder is for.
Love it. This is a really good point. Yeah, this is great. So we spoke about the way how to make sure that your repository setup is properly done so that designers and product managers just can start joining. We spoke about the README files, and I captured some interesting thoughts from Diana and Ivan as well. I really like this prompt. And again, I guess this is like one of the things that is not only about the deliverables that you have within the repository and the pipelines that you have as a process, making sure that the Docker issues are resolved, the environment secrets are properly defined, but it's also about like the prompts, right? What kind of prompts you could use, synthetic prompts, if you like, to stress test your AI readiness, right? Where like you can just try to open your repository and add a prompt. Okay, like start local environment. Maybe local environment, this is like very too technical. This is not the language that designers or product managers might use. They might say like start app. I would like to make some changes, and then see what kind of steps it takes, what kind of README files or cursor rules or agents.md files AI takes a look at, and if you can actually like enable that within like one prompt or not. So that will be an interesting stress test for the AI readiness. Great. And we also spoke about setting up proper rules and configuration files. When it comes to configuration files, this is all related to the access, yeah, the pipeline, the Docker issues if people will have. I've added also a couple links to the Cursor, the AI. So this is like their internal playbook that they started, where they are also explaining how to use Cursor. One of the other ideas that I really like is capturing the taxonomy of folders that Diana mentioned, and also links to the knowledge bases and some recordings from the office hours. So you already have these kind of things. You can just add that to the README file. So every time when people will ask questions, there is a chance that AI will just share those links from the README file and will tell like, this is the way how you can run Docker for the staging environment. Love it. Okay, great. I feel like we are ready for the next step. The next section is a little bit more technical, and let me just quickly go through some of the things here. I had one follow-up question. Ivan, you mentioned Codex setup. Are you referring to OpenAI Codex?
Yeah, so this is referring to OpenAI Codex, which allows you can create and make pull requests straight from the browser without having to ever get onto Cursor or like get all of your local environment set up. I haven't spent as much time with it and figuring this out, but this is just like another alternative you can look into if you which will make all of the sort of code changes that you want without actually getting into kind of all of the code base weeds.
Wow, this is really good point. So this is the way how instead of giving access to the code base, and it's a really hard to make it because like, yeah, some product managers might not have GitHub license and everything else. So the second option is to have these tools that will allow designers and product managers just make changes without having access to the code. Love it. I will also add Cursor background agents where you can add Slack agent. You can just ask questions enabled within the Slack, and people will able to start test some of their ideas without having access to the code base, right? So this is about like plan B options, where instead of giving access to the code base, we can set up some tools that will allow people to make some changes without having access to the code. Great, let's move to the next one, CLI Scripts and Automations. This might be very technical, but I just wanted to give a quick overview of how also another important file that you can take a look at. Again, it depends on the configuration, but this is a package.json file. Let me just check if I added that here or not. Okay, I didn't. Let me pull it from here as well. Okay, so this is the place where you will if you would like to know what kind of scripts or commands are added to the repository, it will not show you all the scripts that you have, but the ones that engineers are using, you can go into the package.json file and take a look into that. So we spoke about core concepts. We spoke about agents.md, about README files. This is the third concept that will help you to understand and make some things easier for you, because sometimes AI might not look into that part. So here's the example where within the package.json file, this is another one, where within the scripts section, you will able to see what kind of commands are available within the repository that engineers set up. So if you would like to know more about, or maybe like even deploy the staging version of the app, feel free to take a look into the package.json. And as Ivan mentioned, you can always ask AI to explain the code base. You can always ask AI to explain what kind of commands you have, what kind of commands engineers made unified across the repository. So it will give you some interesting ideas as well. So the core things that I wanted to chat here about: building scripts that Cursor can execute reliably, right? And this is about, again, about package.json and like what kind of scripts you define here. Ensuring supporting services start automatically. We already spoke about that. And creating one command setup flows. Again, in most of the cases, as I mentioned before here, as we discussed, npm install and npm run dev, this is like the will cover like 60% of the cases. But again, if your configuration is different, you can ask engineers. But those are the commands that you will need to start, or even ask AI, it will able to do this job. Any thoughts on the CLI scripts and automation? Maybe some interesting examples that you're using?
From the design standpoint, this is probably a step that I rely on the developers the most, because as designers, when we create something that works, that is pulling information, we get very excited, right? There is a part of this step that is testing our design system mindset as designers, which is maintenance and governance. We want to make sure that the information is dynamic. We want to make sure that it updates. And this is a piece of the process that connects with probably a repository that developers already own. So in my personal experience, I always defer this step for the developers to connect with whatever I created, just because I am very cautious making any change in the repository that is owned by the engineering and is already in production. So yeah, I'm just saying this because sometimes as designers, we get very excited with the outputs, with the dashboard that is pulling information, but we don't realize that behind the scenes, the information is being hard-coded and it's not dynamic.
Mm-hmm. Love it, love it. Yeah, this is true. This is great. So yeah, maybe some interesting examples that might spark some ideas from the people who are listening as well is designers might appreciate the way how they can run Storybook themselves within the local environment and make changes, right? If you don't have, you can ask your engineers and DevOps to set up these commands, but just by running npm run Storybook, you don't need access to the code. Like you don't need access to all these environments. Like Storybook is locally running. So yeah, or Yarn, you can see the Storybook locally and make changes there and then push it to the hub and create a pull request. Some other examples that designers or product managers might be interested in testing, not sure if they will, but if you would like to run end-to-end playwright tests, seeing if the app works or see specific test case results, you can set it up like that as well. One of the interesting things is another one is to set up a local environment where you will have local version of your AI. And just by having another client that you will run those AI requests, you can actually set up another command to check the AI logs that you are receiving. So if you would like to troubleshoot and maybe fix some prompts or understand why specific tool calls within the AI are not working, you can use that as well. And this is another command that you can set up is, for example, if you are working on emails design, you can set up a command like npm run mail that will just open up the local environment with all the emails, and there are different for that. Like Resend, for example, they have their own React emails library. You can run that and see how different emails are looking like and make some changes there as well. Great. So we spoke about the CLI scripts. I feel like the top one is the Storybook. The third section that we want to chat about is the cursor rules. I know that we spoke about it already, but maybe let's dive deeper a little bit, even deeper here. What I wanted to chat about is maybe some examples of cursor rules or agents.md. Let me just share it here. While I'm preparing a couple of things, Ivan, do you have any thoughts on follow-up thoughts on the cursor rules, or maybe agents.md, what kind of different examples of agents.md might be useful for designers and product managers?
Yeah, I kind of think to plus one to Diana's point from earlier, where she was mentioning that like having README files for all the specific folders that you're looking at is super, super helpful. I think one way to also do this is that if you're a designer, like having well done Storybook documentation, I think also kind of solves this, is that we have a public Storybook link that anyone can go access, and just having good documentation in general. I think all of our agents MD files were generated through some kind of automation process, either through a language model, and then we went in ourselves and tuned it. And so they all follow a really similar pattern of kind of like here are some like top level overviews. Here are some things to like never run, especially in regards to security or permissions issues. And then it kind of also breaks down like what every folder structure looks like, where we have a couple of different products in different areas. And so it's like, here, this folder contains all the information and components that respond to these product areas. And then I think specifically for design system stuff, one of the things we always emphasize within the agent MD files is to always use design system components, tokens, icons first, and like check for those if you ever have to build them. And then like if none of those exist, then to support them using other component libraries that we have. I think that's really helpful because one of the things, especially for designers, is always like, oh, is this, using the correct component? Is this using like the correct thing that we want? And having an explicit mention of that is really, really helpful in making sure that you get consistency across the product.
Yeah, I totally agree with you that, yeah, having cursor rules, like this is like a couple examples. This is one of the, I forgot his name, but he shared this really interesting prompt where you can save some tokens for AI by just saying, when reporting information to me, be extremely concise and sacrifice grammar for the sake of concision. Do not create any markdown files unless I specifically ask you to do so, because sometimes, I don't know why, but Claude generates a lot of markdown files within the cursor. Maybe they have very specific rules to like burn as much tokens as possible. So that's why Claude just generates a lot of that. But you can define those kind of rules. And Ivan, as you mentioned, you can, and then maybe this is like related to your point as well. You can, within the cursor rules or agents.md, you can define the core rules for your repository. Is for UI development. Always use Carbon design system for UI components. For component specific style adjustments, use related SCSS files. You can also set up the, like, explain the API, the data logic, the type definitions, and other things. So this is like the main rule that is very concise, that can be used. Maybe another example here is, I really like this one because like for designers and product managers, it might be a very interesting one. Mostly for designers, is the rules on the design tokens. This is the place where you, if you're using Carbon or Shadcyan or anything else, you can explain what kind of, like how to use design tokens when it comes to UI development. So as you can see here, it explains what kind of things to not to use and how to define CSS variables so that the colors and like spacings and everything will be covered here. And also some values as well. Contextual layer CSS variables, where what's the CSS variable and what's the value of it. Like you can see the spacing variables here and see how those kind of things can be applied in your repository. So that might be helpful. Another one is for performance and refactoring, but this is mostly for engineers. Maybe this one might be more interesting, is the Storybook. When you as a designer tries to create a storybook for a component, you can also define those kind of cursor rules or agents.md, the storybook. So it will give most important things that you want to capture. And also, if you have specific plugins that you are trying to use, and make sure that it will also set up configurations for those plugins as well, or add-ons on the storybook, you can define that. So Diana, like from your perspective, what are the important rules or agents.md that are important for designers and product managers?
Rules is my favorite part of an idea. From my experience, I have experimented with adding 3 sections to rules: persona and parameters. I'm gonna add here that I created for adding a persona for a project that I am working on. So in my rules document in my MD, I have this section, and I'm telling a cursor how I want it to behave. So I'm telling you are a principal AI architect design system. You're gonna help me with this. You're gonna help me with that. Then I have the rules sections where, very similar to that prompt that you read. I have never create additional MDs, never override. If you are going to delete something, you gotta let me know first. You have to flag it. And then I have the parameters, and I'm going to add the parameters that I have set. That of course they can be tailored to any other or other specifics of your project. But this was super helpful for me, adding this piece of information to the rules, because I was also facing the issue of Cursor creating random MDs every time that I ask for a task. And not only MDs, but also the scripts. So I wanted to set I wanted to set some parameters to keep the repository as clean as possible. And this was really helpful. These parameters at the end were a way for the persona to review the answer before giving me the answer in the context window. So that was very cool. So yeah, that's how I have been using it. I am very self-taught. I have all what I have been applying is what I have learned through these weeks, this last month and a half that I have been working with Cursor and recently with Anti-Gravity so much. But yeah, again, rules and parameters are the three sections that I have found the most helpful when using a repository with Cursor.
Oh, but this is really good. This is really great insights, right? So when engineers, and sorry if the engineers are listening to us here, when engineers start working on things, they think about the architecture, like the technical details, right? But when we as designers start creating things, we start with like the based design, right? Where we think about the end user and what kind of challenges they have, what kind of pain points, what's their journey, and what kind of experience will be best fitted for their specific task, right? So maybe adding this kind of design and product management flavors into the code base with some most important highlights from the user research and customer feedback. So every user segment, user group, and personas might be helpful, right? So you can, as you mentioned, Diana, you can stress test one specific functionality and just ask AI agent to, okay, act as this specific persona and go through the flow and tell me how good it is, right? I mean, if there are any issues or maybe like the UX copy is not right there, maybe experience could be simplified, maybe we could think about other touch points within the experience itself. So this is the way how like we can bring this design and product management flavors into the code base by creating those kind of persona based fact highlights, right?
We have a funny story around this. I am experimenting with the creation of an MCP, and I'm wrapping an open source design system for that purpose. So I asked Cursor to add a car component to my repository, and my parameters are very specific of if I'm asking for something that is unnecessary, I want you to tell me. I want you to push back and be honest. And Cursor did. Cursor set a set of recommendations, and one of them was in regards to the card component that you asked me to create. I am not going to do that because we already have a primitive called surface, and card is a form of surface. So we're just going to keep primitive for now. And I was, wow, this is the type of feedback I am looking for. That was
Love it. Like this is really great. Maybe this is a really good use case, right? Where AI could push back engineers and designers and product managers when it comes to design system components. So do you have any thoughts on that? Like how to enable that, like through agents.md or something else?
Yeah, it's so
uh,
funny because oh, sorry. Go for it. Oh, yeah. I was just gonna say very quickly. I feel like it's really funny because all of the things that you're thinking about or like talking about in regards to how AI works, it's sort of almost like if the code base and like a lot of the infrastructure is set up well, then it sort of already works. I think to the point earlier about like automation, one of the things that we have in our like GitHub support is that when you make a PR, it deploys like a live preview branch, it deploys like a storybook instance, and so designers are able to like even see all those sorts of things. And so I think in regards to the agent's MD file about all those variables, one of the things we've been experimenting at the company is like implementing and using Code Connect. And Code Connect also just recently, Figma recently launched the UI version of their Code Connect. And so you're able to hook up all of your components across that. And I think this sort of comes back to it's like, well, I think in order to have AI use your design system and use it well, like the design system has to be very robust and like well documented and supported. But those are some of the ways where it's like, oh, for example, one issue that we have or a couple things that we have is that like some of our components aren't called the same things in like Figma and code. And so even engineers who work on it were like, oh, we're looking for this component, but we can't find it. And so like how would the AI language model also be able to find it? And so I think it's about providing that sort of like infrastructure for both people and the AI agent to work. across the stack and like figure out those same things and establish that shared language, I think is, yeah, really important, especially for like design systems work.
Love it. Maybe another stress test here will be is, as Diana and Ivan, you mentioned, right? Try to create a prompt that will try to not use design system guide. So then, as you mentioned, like adding a card when we have a surface component already might be a good stress test. If your AI could capture that with all the infrastructure, with all the README files and cursor rules and agents.md, that might be an interesting prompt to stress test your repository, making sure that it's AI ready. Asking those kind of questions and see if it will give you a good answer here or not. Love it. Okay, the next one is the team onboarding and workflows. I feel like we already spoke about it, most of the things, enabling new contributors to get started with a single prompt, reducing setup friction and confusion, creating documentation that works for both humans and AI. Yeah, I feel like we already spoke about that. Like, yeah, that might be a good discussion here. So when it comes to like onboarding guidelines, what is the ideal way? Like, do you envision it as more like Loom recordings of like core activities or like knowledge base documented somewhere? I know like the repository is like made for engineers, so some of the things that are outside of this might be just added as a link to the Loom recording or to the knowledge base where designers or product managers or marketing team will dive deeper and read more. Like have you had any like good practices on that? Some interesting learnings. Ivan, you already shared the running office hours. Yeah.
Okay. For me, what is the most useful is, it's gonna sound silly, but my LinkedIn algorithm is very trained to give me information about IDE tools, about articles, experiments. I follow very specific people, so that's how I stay current. And also the Medium articles are fascinating. Reading through the Medium articles, I have found that the designers, I can only speak for designers are tackling the same problem of making design system machine readable from different perspectives. And it's just fascinating to read that.
Love it. Yeah, this is great. Great. I feel like we spoke about the team onboarding workflow, so let's not repeat ourselves here. I know that we have only a couple minutes left, and I wanted to give some time for every speaker to share what are their like three core learnings that they got from the session. Then would you like to go first and just share like three main learnings of the session that you have?
The three main learnings, I would definitely want to keep exploring more that agents repository that I want to share. I think that would polish my self-taught approach to how I'm using the IDE agents. A second learning, the rules that you added around how to implement the right CSS. That is pretty cool, and it is something that we in our company we have been trying to approach as AI orchestration. And a third learning, just keep learning. The third learning, just keep learning. Yeah.
Love it, Ivan.
Yeah, on my end, I think the first is just this sort of realization that good AI tooling and good AI making stems from just like good foundations, whether that's through like solid CI/CD on the engineering side, writing good components to begin with, or having, robust design system work and design system documentation. One of the things that we have in our agents.md file that we always ask for is like, hey, we tell the agent that if they're building components to look for, sister components or like things in like nearby folders. And so it's like, if those components aren't well built to begin with, it's kind of like AI spits out what it takes in. So if you don't put good components in, you probably won't get good components out. I think the second thing is, really interested in digging into some of the things Diana mentioned on personas and parameters. And I think especially related to that is sort of the usage of cursor rules, just like being able to have more granular and specific applications for maybe like design usage or PM usage. And I think, the last part is just, being aware and what's out there. And there's so much to learn. And I think everyone's trying to figure out together. And so it's really about the community space and like trying things out and not being afraid to prototype or experiment with.
So thank you, Ivan and Diana, for joining. Please make sure to follow them on LinkedIn. Diana is posting a lot of things on the AI part. Ivan, thank you for sharing your link as well. I hope you will also start posting more on LinkedIn, sharing your wisdom with others. So yeah, thank you very much for joining the session. So the recording will be available. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, one. Thanks, everyone.